This is how Europe would look like had the Soviet Union defended Czechoslovakia against the German aggression in 1938. Historically, Czechoslovakia was famously partitioned in 1938, where they lost the Sudetenland to Germany in the Munich conference. I want to raise a question regarding what if the Soviet Union decided to help the seemingly lonely Czechoslovakia against the German aggressor. It was possible as the two countries had good relations, as seen on the 16th of May 1935, when the Czechoslovak-Soviet Treaty of Mutual Assistance was signed. Allegedly, Stalin pledged to defend Czechoslovakia in the event of an attack by Germany or Poland, but only if France decided to help first. You will soon find out how the Soviet Union supporting Czechoslovakia would affect the German morale, and what effect it would have on the events in Europe. Let me show you what I came up with. Looking at the map, you can argue that the Soviet Union supporting Czechoslovakia wouldn't make a difference. The reason for that is that the two countries do not border each other, and even if hypothetically Germany were to invade Czechoslovakia and the Soviet Union were to join the war, the communists do not border Germany directly, but also they cannot send help via land to their ally. During the Sudetenland crisis, the Soviet Union expressed interest in supporting Czechoslovakia, so they thought about sending an equipment to Czechoslovakia via Poland. The Poles, however, were not so enthusiastic about the idea, and they said that they would shoot down all Soviet aircraft flying over the country. The Soviet Union is truly blocked from sending aid to Czechoslovakia. I want to mention the Munich conference, as there, France, Britain, Germany and Italy decided for Czechoslovakia to give up the Sudetenland in exchange for eternal peace. The country ceased to exist the next year, by the way, so this clearly failed. In this alternate history scenario, the same conference would happen, but this time I suggest that Edvard Beneš doesn't give up the most fortified regions against Germany. He would realize that if Czechoslovakia gives up the Sudetenland, there wouldn't be anything stopping Germany from taking the rest of the country, which actually happened. I am simply suggesting for Czechoslovakia to refuse the results of the Munich conference, so Germany is likely to invade Czechoslovakia. As I mentioned earlier, the Soviet Union had good relations with the country, but said it would only join in a war against Germany or Poland if France joins first. With Czechoslovakia refusing the French plan for peace, the French or British are guaranteed not to join this conflict. However, if the Poles decide to still occupy Zaolzie in the event of a war between Germany and Czechoslovakia, it would give the Red Army justification to attack Poland, under the pretext of protecting Czechoslovakia. Let me remind you that historically exactly this happened, but the Soviet Union did not invade Poland in 1938. They did a year later. But how would it turn out if the Poles decided to take advantage of the busy Czechoslovak army and subsequently occupy the whole of Zaolzie, Orava and Spiš? The fact that the Polish government did not want to risk a war with the Red Army at any cost did not mean that the claimed territory would not be occupied. Maybe Poland still believes that the Red Army will not respond seriously to this attack on Czechoslovak sovereignty. In this alternate timeline, with the refusal of the Munich conference by Czechoslovakia, the Germans would pave the way for war, knowing very well that France and Britain will not join. I want to again repeat the reason as to why the Allies will not join, which is that they agreed for peace to be sustained in Europe that Czechoslovakia has to give up some land. Now that the Czechoslovak government had refused, the Allies can say that they tried their best. But it was Czechoslovakia's fault for this war, not theirs. As a result, I think that Czechoslovakia can be blamed for the start of the war, at least by France and Britain. Here is how the German invasion of the country would go. Germany would have a slow and steady progress into the country, but the Germans would want to maximize the chaos, wanting to bring Poland in this war on their side. This is because the Poles had technically taken advantage of Czechoslovakia by annexing Zaolzie, which, let me remind you, happened historically. It wouldn't be so difficult for Germany to force an incident and bring Poland into the war, but not as an ally, despite the colors I use. Poland and Germany will not be allies, they will just have a shared enemy. To achieve this, several members of the SS would change into Czechoslovak uniforms and suddenly sabotage a paramilitary train in the Polish part of Zaolzie, thus most likely giving the Polish army under the command of General Władysław Bornowski to carry out a retaliatory strike against Czechoslovakia. The act itself was supposed to break out on October the 4th, i.e. the 4th day of the war. At the time, due to bad weather and muddy terrain, the Germans so far managed to conquer only Egerland and the Osatian Mountains. After the Polish army had occupied parts of Zaolzie, the Soviet Union would announce the non-aggression pact with Poland on October the 5th. The following day, the Red Army launches an invasion of southeastern Poland with the aim of gaining a common border with Czechoslovakia. As for Czechoslovakia, since the Polish army has stopped and is not advancing towards the city of Ostrava, the Czechoslovak High Command decides to concentrate on fighting the Germans, who, after the bombing of the Austrian city of Linz, with the aim of cutting off the railway between the German 12th and 14th divisions, launch an attack on southern Moravia. This attack will become one of the biggest disasters for the Germans, as the Czechoslovak engineers had a plan to blow up a dam, with the aim of flooding the entire border between northern Austria and southern Moravia, in order to trap the German 14th Army south of Brno. After the entire German 14th Army has been wiped out by artillery fire from the mountainous highlands, the German Chancellor is shot and followed by a coup d'etat. Oster's conspiracy was already in motion, and there was no way to stop it. This is possible as many in Germany still didn't trust the German Führer and his plans. Clearly, the Germans have a slow progress, but now the Soviet Union is involved. Germany and the Soviet Union are technically not at war, but in practice the Red Army is trying to reach Czechoslovakia as fast as possible and defend the front line against Germany. This is why at the same time the southeast of Poland would be in the hands of the Red Army, due to how vital it was for the plan to succeed. Again, I want to make it very clear that Poland and Germany are not allies, and Germany and the Soviet Union are not at war, but practically this is how the front lines would look. Due to the Oster conspiracy, I assume that Germany will drop out of the war, as the prominent members of the German Ultranationalist Party will be arrested, and their equipment would be sabotaged. After the peace between Czechoslovakia and Germany is concluded, France, together with the United Kingdom, brings a call to the Soviet Union to immediately end its invasion of Poland. Stalin is finally willing to end the invasion, but only under the condition that he can keep the conquered parts of Poland. This can be justified by the Soviet Union as ensuring an everlasting peace, due to the ability of the Soviet Union to help Czechoslovakia out. The Allies will agree that Stanislavov, Lviv and Volyn provinces become part of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, i.e. the Soviet Union. As for Czechoslovakia, they would get back occupied Zaolzie from Poland. The overall development of this situation is thus almost identical to the one in the event that Czechoslovakia had defended itself without Soviet intervention, which is a scenario that I previously made. The only difference is the embarrassingly humiliated Poland. At this point, I am required to show you this coin from Czechoslovakia, from the year of 1921, so right after the country was created. Despite the country being formed in 1919, it took them 2 years to come up with a national currency. I think that before that, they used French francs. I really like how on the back of this coin it shows a sickle, which is technically a communist symbol. The coin is 20 helera, and here I have 25 helera, but this time it's from 1933, so it's very close to the time period that I'm talking about. It was also very likely that these coins were used during the Sudetenland crisis and briefly after Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. Now, back to the video. I want to quickly mention that I was a bit optimistic. Of course, the Red Army was still under a massive purge, so their offensive capabilities would be greatly limited. Still, I think that they can reach Czechoslovakia even at the cost of hundreds of thousands of dead communists. In the following years, the Kingdom of Hungary, out of fear of Russian Bolshevism, begins to align itself with the Little Entente. The Hungarian regent Mikuláš Horthy will be removed, and his position will be taken by Paul Teleki, who was also a Hungarian nationalist. But on the other hand, he was an opponent of German hegemony and practically sympathized with the Czechoslovaks. There will probably be a territorial compromise in which the kingdom will get back the Hungarian inhabited parts of Slovakia and Carpathian Ruthenia, plus the western parts of Transylvania and northern Vojvodina. No, I'm just kidding, because screw the Hungarians, right? Jokes aside, Benito Mussolini, also out of fear of communism, prefers to start cooperating with the Allies. Nationalist Spain, which ceases to be supported by Germany and from which the German Condor Legion lives, begins to find itself quite isolated. Subsequently, with greater Soviet material support and Czechoslovak volunteers, Republican Spain is stabilized. So, Francisco Franco never takes Madrid, but at the same time, it begins to push the two hostile Spanish factions into a stalemate, where neither of these two factions can gain enough supremacy over the entire Spanish country. In the end, there will most likely be a temporary truce, in which the map of the Iberian Peninsula will look almost exactly like it did in Hearts of Iron 4 in July 1936. Is this a based reference? The only difference will be that the entire northern coast of Spain will remain in the hands of General Franco, while the Balearic Islands will fall to the Republic. As for the future of Europe, it's very difficult to tell, since the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was never signed and probably never will be. There will be no occupation of Bessarabia, the Baltics, and no invasion of Finland, at least not initially. As a result, the Soviet Union would have to focus on Spain for now. Stalin will most likely try to make Republican Spain his puppet. If the Second World War were to ever break out, the Soviet Union would undoubtedly be the one to start it. And that would probably happen if Franco Spain decides to start cooperating with the Allies just like Italy did out of fear of communism. That was the realistic scenario, as not a lot can happen. Without an ultranationalist Germany, nobody is insane enough to start a world war. Still, the world is quite altered. But now, let us look at a much more interesting scenario, at the expense of some realism. Going back to the Oster conspiracy, what if the Soviet Union didn't sign a peace treaty with Poland and decided to continue conquering the unyielding Polish? Before I answer you, it is necessary for you to realize that the Allies in 1936 had the capacity to defeat the then not so powerful Germany. But on the other hand, although they despised the Soviet Union, the people of France and Britain were not motivated to go to war with a distant country. France in particular, where up to a third of the population looked up to the Soviet Union as a paradise for peasants and workers, could find itself in a civil war if it declared war on the Soviet Union. The Soviets were aware of this, hence why they can risk pushing further into Poland, without expecting the Allies to fight back. Thanks to a stable economy and a high standard of living, the United Kingdom was not threatened by such a civil war like the one in France. But even the Brits at that time did not desire for a war with a country located on the other side of the globe. Ironically, the only hope for the Polish people would be the defeated Germans, which by intervening in Poland can save Europe from Bolshevism exactly as the Allies wanted. As for the Soviet Union, there were still major purges going on there, and the Red Army, although successful so far, could be pushed back to Ukraine after the Germans were involved in this conflict. We must not forget that the Poles also had one of the largest armies in Europe. However, if the war dragged on until winter, it would have meant a complete collapse for the German economy, since without Czechoslovak gold, it wouldn't be possible to finance either the factories or the citizens in Germany. Germany will also most likely become a temporary military junta with the promise to restore democracy after the war. So these military guys probably will not be so good at running the economy of the country, hence why a longer war would benefit the Soviet Union massively. Both scenarios are possible. First, let us look at the most optimistic and realistic one, in which the Germans and Poles managed to push the Soviets beyond their borders. Stalin now has two options: either push the Polish army out of western Belarus, which belonged to Poland at the time, or try to conquer the city of Lvov, which the Red Army failed to conquer during the whole of October. Stalin decides to conquer this city inhabited by Poles at the time and inflict a symbolic defeat on the Crusaders against the Bolshevism. However, this will give the Polish-German coalition the opportunity to attack the Red Army both from the north and the west, de facto encircling it. At the end of October 1938, the Soviet Union loses over 100,000 men and over 1,000 tanks. Stalin eventually decides to conclude with white peace. Practically, the Soviet Union went through the exactly same thing they went in our history during the Winter War with Finland. This time, however, they will not annex even an inch of enemy territory. Europe is safe for now. Now, let us look at a more ridiculous scenario if Stalin decided to push the Poles out of western Belarus, instead of taking the city of Lvov, as it would be possible to let the Poles and Germans bleed until a civil war broke out in the Reich. I already mentioned how unstable Germany would be in such a scenario. In this case, the front line would remain stable, as the Red Army would go on the defense in enemy territory, making the Polish-German counterattack a failure. In December, there would be a subsequently coup d'etat in Saxony, Saxony-Anhalt and Brandenburg, after which a coalition of anarchists, communists and social democrats, very similar to the one in the Spanish Republic, would take power over in Germany, or at least in these three provinces for now. The Wehrmacht and the Luftwaffe, relying on gendarmerie and policemen in the hope of pacifying the revolution, will intend to continue fighting in Poland. However, this will be a fatal mistake. The German leftist coalition managed to take control of northern Germany, with the exception of East Prussia. Austria then, with the support of Benito Mussolini, declares independence from Germany. This is followed by Bavaria, Baden-Württemberg and finally the Rhineland, which will soon become a French protectorate. At the end of December, all of Poland, including Warsaw, is in the hands of the Red Army. In January of the following year, new state borders are drawn. Suwałki and Wileja province will fall to Lithuania. Western Belarus is annexed into the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic, while Western Ukraine is annexed into the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. The new Polish People's Republic is forced to surrender Danzig and the Dansk Corridor to the new German Democratic Republic, which has meanwhile recognized the independence of the Rhineland, Baden-Württemberg, Bavaria and surely Austria. Of course, the Allies will respond to all of this with sanctions that they had already lifted on Italy. Even Czechoslovakia, for which Stalin went to war with Poland, began to perceive the Soviet Union more as a threat rather than a friend. As in the previous case, there will be a change of leader in the neighboring kingdom of Hungary, which will join the Little Entente together with Austria, probably alongside the South German states. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Italy begins to reconcile with the Allies in order to defeat the Spanish communists, even at the cost of a Francoist dictatorship over the Iberian Peninsula. Under these conditions, it would be possible to defeat the Comintern only if democratic countries begin to cooperate with the ultranationalist ones. This is even with cruel imperialist Japan, which now has no opportunity to occupy French Indochina, so the Americans will never have a reason to sanction them, thereby preventing the attack on Pearl Harbor. However, if Stalin were to win, he would have to moderate his expansionist policies and concentrate on raising the living standards in subjugated Poland and allied Germany. Of course, I doubt that this would be possible over the Catholic Poles, especially when it is the Russians who once again control their homeland. On the other hand, if compliance exceeds resistance, it may help the Bolsheviks consolidate their new position in Central Europe. Another important step is to help the Spanish Republic defeat the nationalists, in order to further radicalize the neighboring French people. Not that the French communists had any chance of winning the French elections of 1940, but their position could be much stronger if the Popular Front won on the Iberian Peninsula. Another important step is the communist coup d'etat in the Baltic countries, which also happened in our history, thanks to which Stalin was able to annex them legally. However, so that the Soviet Union does not needlessly increase tension in the world, it will not occupy the newly neighboring communist countries, but invite them into the Comintern as equal partners. The final step for the Soviet Union will be to help Mao Zedong defeat the Japanese and gain control over the Korean peninsula. Without the Japanese on the Asian mainland, Stalin would already start thinking about subjugating Europe. If the Japanese were pushed out of the Asian mainland before the French elections of 1944, the French communists could theoretically get the most votes, but I doubt they would be able to form a governing majority. It is highly unlikely that the communist minority government would be able to get France to leave the United Kingdom and the Kingdom of Italy. On the other hand, if in the following election of 1948 the communists managed to get enough votes to form a governing majority, it would already be possible to ensure the departure of France from the Allies, and in the early 1950s to liquidate them together with the entire Comintern economically and militarily. It is also important to realize that since there was no other world war up until then, there was no such rapid atomic race, so it's impossible for Great Britain or the United States of America to have the nuclear bomb. By the late 1950s, the Red Army had already been competent enough to defeat both the United Kingdom and the Little Entente. Well, we'll never find out, and honestly, I'm glad for that. Red Europe would be as inhospitable to its citizens as the red planet of Mars. If you want to see a more realistic video in which Czechoslovakia will manage to defend itself against the Austrian painter even without the Soviet intervention, I recommend checking this video out, where Czechoslovakia rejects the Munich agreement. I hope to see you there.